When the internet began, bulletin board services, or BBS, became the first online communities of the so-called information superhighway. Using their phone lines, people logged in from all over America to talk about sports, games, movies, and on one BBS in particular, share their ghost stories. Over time, those communities all went dark, except for one lone server that continues to operate somewhere in an unknown part of Pennsylvania's Rust Belt. A relic of the 1990s, veiled in mystery, it is a digital archive of humanity's strangest encounters with the unknown, as told by the people who experienced them. My name is Brandon Schexnayder, and you are listening to Fear Daily.
Subject: The Statuette, Part 1. User: DB3CX119. Posted March 19, 1997.
My father was a real shithead, and I don't say that lightly. I'm not one of those people who rewrites history just because someone stops breathing. The truth is the truth. Whether the man is upright or is zipped in a bag, he was mean, stubborn, unpredictable, and he never threw anything away unless it somehow meant something to him. Usually, something awful. He collected junk the way other men collected memories, and when he died, all of it was waiting for me in that little second-floor apartment that smelled like dust, cigarettes, and a life that never had much good in it. I stood in the doorway for a long time that first day, just taking it in. Everywhere you looked, there was a pile or a stack or a bag stuffed until the seams puffed. Old issues, Field and Stream, mixed with expired medication bottles, broken picture frames, phone bills from the early 80s. The kitchen counter was buried under takeout containers and rusty tools. Half the living room was blocked off entirely by boxes he must have dragged home from the curb, convinced they held treasure. There was no one else left to deal with it. No siblings, no extended family who hadn't already washed their hands of him decades ago. Just me. The only person foolish enough to still come around once or twice a year out of some stubborn sense of duty. And yet, as miserable as it was, some part of me hoped, God help me, that I'd find at least one thing worth keeping. Something small, something sentimental, something that proved it had one decent thought about me in the last 30 years. I dug through drawers, old cigar tins, plastic shopping bags tied in tight knots. Nothing, just trash and more trash, but I kept at it for days. On the fourth trip over, after hours of hauling bags to the dumpster behind the building, I found a shoebox behind the couch, wedged between a stack of newspapers and a busted floor lamp. Inside were a handful of little knickknacks, a brass key with no tag, a wooden yo-yo stained dark with age, a chipped ashtray shaped like a trout, and near the bottom, wrapped in an old sock, a small statuette of St. Peter. It wasn't valuable. You could tell that right away. It was about 4 inches tall, crudely carved, probably something he picked up at a yard sale or church rummage. St. Peter's face was worn down so soft it barely had features left. It looked like something a bored man keeps on his desk to fiddle with while he talks on the phone. But for reasons I can't explain, I put it in the box with the rest of the items I was bringing home. Maybe it was the only thing that didn't feel coated in misery. When I got back to my apartment that night, I dumped the box on the coffee table, made a sandwich, and went straight to bed. I didn't even bother looking through anything. I was too exhausted and too grateful to be somewhere that didn't smell like a landfill baked in the sun. But that's when the dreams started. The first one wasn't frightening, just intense. I dreamed I was walking down a long hallway lined with doors on both sides. The wallpaper was the kind you'd see in cheap motels off the highway, golden yellow with a faint floral pattern. But it kept shifting, like it was breathing. I felt someone behind me, even though I didn't hear footsteps. I tried to turn around, but my feet kept moving forward, step by step, like I was being pulled by a cord attached to my spine. I woke up sweating, tangled in the sheets, breath catching unevenly in my chest. When I sat up and squinted at the nightstand, the statuette of St. Peter was sitting there. I hadn't put it there. I knew I hadn't. Everything from the box was still on the coffee table when I went to bed, but the little figure stood right next to my glass of water, tilted slightly toward the bed like it had been watching me sleep. I chalked it up to exhaustion. Maybe I'd grabbed it without thinking. Maybe it fell out of the box. Maybe anything. I put it back on the coffee table and went to work. That night, the dream came again. Only this time, the hallway was darker. The doors lining the hall were all cracked open just a little bit, and through each crack came the faint sound of someone whispering. I couldn't make out the words, but it felt like they were talking about me, not to me. I tried to stop walking, but my legs kept moving, steady, forced. I felt something cold slip down the back of my neck, like a finger tracing my spine. When I jolted awake, the room was quiet, and the statuette was back on the nightstand. I stared at it for a long time. There was no way I'd moved it in my sleep 2 nights in a row. I wasn't a sleepwalker. I wasn't disoriented. I remembered exactly how I'd left the living room, and that little figure wasn't anywhere near me when I turned in. I carried it into the kitchen, set it on the table, and went back to bed and pulled the covers over my head like a child, embarrassed by how uneasy I felt. The next morning, I stepped into the kitchen and froze. The statuette was sitting on the counter near the sink. I didn't touch it. I didn't look at it directly. I packed a bag for work and left early, deciding I'd deal with it that night when I wasn't half awake and jumpy. But the dream that night was the worst yet. I was in the same hallway, but something new had joined me. I kept seeing flashes of someone at the far end, a shape, a silhouette just tall enough to scrape the ceiling if it wanted to. The figure didn't walk, it angled forward like its weight pulled it along the floor. It never got closer, but every time I blinked, it seemed a little clearer. I felt dread curl low inside me, the kind that doesn't need explanation. I woke with my sheets damp with sweat, my hand gripping the mattress so tight the muscles in my forearm throbbed. The statuette sat inches from my pillow. That was the moment fear finally rooted itself in me. This wasn't exhaustion or memory tricks or my brain playing games because I'd spent a week in my father's mausoleum of a home. Something else was happening, something that did not care if I believed in it. I grabbed the statuette, walked straight to the dumpster behind my building, and threw it in. I did not hesitate. I didn't second guess. I tossed it into the dark and listened to it clatter against the metal bottom. Then I went back upstairs, locked the door behind me, and convinced myself it was over. Well, it wasn't. The dream returned, more vivid than ever, and when I woke up, the statuette was on the carpet beside my bed, and that was the moment when I snapped. I shoved it into a plastic bag, tied the knot tight, and shoved the bag into the freezer. I didn't care how ridiculous it looked. I just needed it to stop appearing beside me like a loyal dog returning every morning. But that night, the dream didn't feel like a dream at all. The hallway was gone. Instead, I stood in a room with peeling wallpaper and a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. A voice whispered in my ear, close, breathy, urgent. But I couldn't make out the words. It felt like I was inches away from understanding something terrible, like I was right on the edge of a truth I didn't want. I woke, gasping. The freezer door was cracked open. The bag was gone. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, staring at nothing. Whatever was happening wasn't going to stop on its own. I needed help, real help, the kind that didn't come from prayer or throwing shit in dumpsters. So I went to the hall closet, dragged out the old yellow phone book I hadn't opened in years, slapped it down on the table, and started flipping through the pages with cold, shaking fingers. I wasn't looking for a priest. I wasn't looking for a therapist. I really didn't know what I was looking for until I found it. A small, boxed-in ad near the bottom of a page. Madam Serafina, spiritual consultation, guidance, visitations, cleansing.
Subject, The Nest. User, NoGrunt99. Posted, June 21st, 1999.
As soon as we found that first carcass there near the glacier, I knew this wasn't just a simple mission to protect a couple scientists. I'd been an infantry marine before I signed on to private contracting work, and I'd seen damn near every type of carnage a human being can cause, but this wasn't that. The thing lying in the snow barely looked like it ever belonged to the living world. A caribou stripped to the ribs, torn open like something hungry had scooped out everything warm and left the hide hanging in strings. Dr. Hanley kept insisting it was wolves or a polar bear or maybe a wolverine in a frenzy, but none of us bought that. You don't spend a whole career in uniform and mistake chaos for precision. And what we were looking at was precise, ripped clean, blood frozen into black plates across the ice. No tracks around it, no drag marks, just the carcass itself, like it fell out of the sky. We were on Ellesmere Island, the kind of place where the sun drops in October and doesn't haul itself back up for months. The darkness wasn't just an absence. It had weight to it. You could feel it pushing on your coat, pressing against your chest. Dr. Hanley's team was studying glacial movements and seismic shifts. My team, me, Alvarez and a fresh army kid named Reeves were hired to keep them safe from the cold and the wildlife. Nothing we couldn't handle, nothing that should have been out of the ordinary. That first carcass changed everything. Alvarez crouched beside the rib cage and slid a gloved finger along the bone. "No scavenger did this," he muttered. "These cuts are clean." Reeves asked if it could have been claws, and Alvarez shook his head. "Not claws," he said. "Blades." The wind pushed through the valley then, long and low, like something moaning through a long concrete tunnel. Even the scientists felt it. None of us talked much on the hike back. That night, the power hiccuped. Not long, just enough for the lights to die for a couple of seconds. And in that brief slice of blackness, I looked out the slit in the curtains and saw something at the tree line. 2 red points hovering above the snow. Not moving, not blinking, watching. When the lights popped back on, the eyes were gone. I didn't tell the others. I didn't want to be the guy stirring up panic, but I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark on the edge of my bunk, staring at my boots while the generator hummed through the walls. Those red eyes wouldn't leave my head. They reminded me of something I'd seen once before in a different world, but under the same kind of darkness. It was 1991 outside Basra. I'd taken extra watch because my squad leader was laid up with some stomach bug, and the night was black enough to swallow a city. Halfway through the shift, I caught movement along the fence. Not walking, not pacing. Just 2 pale glints floating in the dark, like someone holding up 2 silver coins. I raised my rifle, thinking maybe I was exhausted or losing it in the heat, but the glints didn't waver. They didn't blink or drift. They just stared back at me across the sand. When I called it in, 2 Marines came running. By the time they got there, whatever it was had vanished. Command brushed it off the next day. A feral dog, optical trick, exhaustion, but I remembered the feeling. That tightness in my ribs, like I was being sized up by something that didn't breathe the same air as me. The red eyes here felt exactly the same. The next morning, Hanley pushed to keep working. She wanted seismic sensors planted along the glacier. Contract was contract, so we geared up and trekked into the foothills. We found the second carcass 2 miles north. This one was worse, a polar bear, a big one, torn apart like something looking for a prize inside it. Rib cage cracked, fur shredded, skull gnawed nearly bare. Whatever had done it wasn't surviving, it was feeding. Even Hanley didn't try to rationalize it this time. Then came the sound. A clicking, sharp, rhythmic, like stones being tapped together. It echoed across the ice and made the hairs inside my ears twitch. Alvarez froze and raised his rifle. "Movement," he whispered. 2 o'clock. I turned, expecting shadows, maybe a trick of the headlamp, but the shadows blinked. 2 red points, hovering above the snow, then another pair beside them, and another, 3 sets, then 5, then too many to count, all of them perfectly still, all of them glowing faintly like embers behind frosted glass. "Back up," I said low. Rifles up. We stepped away, and the eyes drifted forward, not stepping, just sliding across the snow like the distance didn't mean anything to them. My breath fogged the air, and the eyes hovered above it, too high for wolves, too tall for men. The clicking grew louder, the wind shifted, and a smell rolled through, metallic, sickly, sweet, like pennies warmed in your palm and rotten meat thawing in the dark. Alvarez fired first. One sharp crack that split the valley. The eyes scattered sideways in a smear of motion. The scientists scream. Reeves slipped and hit the snow hard. We dragged him up and ran. The clicking behind us multiplied. Dozens of sharp taps. Then a shriek that was too thin, too long to belong to any animal that lived in this world. Camp came into view at last, a line of prefab modules and a radio tower stabbing into the endless dark. We got the scientists inside just as something slammed into the door hard enough to shutter the whole damn frame. The tapping started again, but now it was crawling along the walls, testing, searching. We backed away from the windows as a shape pressed itself against one. Long limbs, wrong proportions, a head tilted too far to the left like a broken marionette, and two bright red eyes glinting through the glass. Its teeth needle-like, translucent, packed tightly like rows of frozen stalactites, bared in a slow grin. 3 more shapes gathered behind it, then 5, then a crowd, a nest of them. Hanley slid to the floor, shaking so hard her gear rattled. Reeve whispered, "Vampires," and Alvarez snapped at him to shut up, but even he kept glancing toward the windows. The creatures circled the station in a slow, deliberate pattern. Tap, tap, tap. The sound crawled into your molars. "We can't stay here," Alvarez said. "We stay, we die." He wasn't wrong. We were sitting in a steel box in the middle of the Arctic night, surrounded by things that sliced open polar bears like fruit. The radio barely picked up static. Weather was killing the tower. Our evac wasn't scheduled for another week. "We're running for the crawlers," I said. "Armored, diesel-fed. If we can get the engines warm, we can outrun them." Hanley whispered, "What if they're waiting?" "They are," I said. "But staying here is worse." Something slammed into the siding again, hard enough to dent the metal. The lights flickered, the glowing eyes brightened like they were excited. I checked my mag. Alvarez braced at the door. Reeves swallowed a sob so loud it shook him. "You open it," I told Alvarez, "and we sprint." He nodded once. The door cracked open. The red eyes whipped toward us like a flock of birds, pivoting mid-air, hundreds of them lighting the dark in scattered sparks, and we ran straight into the night.
Fear Daily is an independent podcast hosted by Brandon Schexnayder and written by Brennan Storr, with Joanna Smith serving as the consulting editor, audio production by Rachel Boyd, and sound design by Southern Gothic Media. This podcast is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents are either products of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or to real events or locations, is entirely coincidental. Ad-free versions of Fear Daily are available now on your favorite podcast apps. For more information, visit feardaily.com. But move fast. before the server goes offline.